Welcome to my Accent is No Accident podcast. I'm your host, Maritza Perez, and we are here today with a woman with an extraordinary purpose. Heal the people, heal the planet. She is Carey MacCarthy, founder and CEO of startup Art Therapy. Carey MacCarthy is a registered art therapist, licensed professional clinical counselor, author, researcher, speaker, and facilitator professionally active within the art therapy field since 2001. She is the co-author of Star Up, a school-based arts curriculum for Native American youth and all cultures, Inventions for Development and Learning, Facilitators Manual, that has been featured in journals, magazines, radio shows, and podcasts. Carey specializes in trauma of all ages and cultures, and Native American historical and their intergenerational trauma. Carey is trained in the road approach to healing with Lakota, Dakota tribes, and is a fluent Spanish speaker. Welcome, Carey. Bienvenida. It is an honor to have you today with us here.
Gracias, Maritza. Gracias por invitarme. Es un honor muy grande. Gracias. Hello, my name is Carey MacCarthy. Thank you for the beautiful introduction, Maritza, and I'm so happy to be here. And I'm super excited to see where your podcast is just going to blow up and be crazy good because you are amazing.
Thank you, Carey. I am very happy and honored to have you here. Really, really. But the first question that I have and that I ask every one of my guests is, Carey, what is your accent and why is not an accident?
I have no idea what kind of accent I have, and I love that question. When I'm in working with tribes, they say I speak Indian, quote unquote, and it's not a racist thing. When you actually work with tribes, they call themselves Indian, and so when you ingratiate in the community. But anyway, but when I just absorb accents, and I have a California accent, when from the East Coast, or because I'm from California, so. I don't know what accent I have, and I might have a Spanish accent too sometimes. So it changes.
I love that. So, Carey, one of the things that I loved from your work is that you work with all cultures and all ages and specialize in healing trauma with art therapy. So explain to us what is art therapy and how that can help healing the trauma.
Yeah, so art therapy is a very powerful way, and it's something that shamans have been using for thousands of years. But in the early 1900s, it actually became a profession, and actually, became an art therapy profession in the 40s. So the way it works is when you're doing art is a right brain activity. So it engages the right side of the brain. And that is actually where trauma and traumatic stress researchers have shown that trauma is stored is in the right side of the brain. And so when you bring art to the practice of healing trauma, it actually unlocks the trauma. And then when you bring language into it, which is the left side of the brain activity, it creates a cortical consolidation, or left brain, right brain communication. And it helps to file the trauma away in the correct place and rebuild neural pathways.
So basically it's thinking happy and doing happy.
Well, kind of. There's a lot more to it, but the way that we use art therapy and the way that I was taught with my Professor Linda Chapman a long time ago, who pioneered neurodevelopmental art therapy. And neurodevelopmental art therapy is a little bit different compared to regular standard art therapy because we're actually doing a bottom-up approach. So we are targeting the four functioning structures of the brain from the bottom up and going in and doing very scientifically developed art therapy activities to target each area of the brain. So we're bringing in all these different adaptive coping skills. We're bringing in empowerment, leadership, healthy relationships, boundaries, but also reworking the brain and building the neural networks all the way from the bottom to the top, which is the executive functioning part of the brain. So that's responsible for decision making, planning, wisdom, compassion, empathy, and understanding right from wrong, which is super important because we use that part of our brain in daily lives. So what happens in trauma is that the neurobiology of information processing, that all the information comes in through our senses: sight, sound, touch, kinesthetic feeling, and then sometimes then it goes into the right side of the brain, over to the left side, back to the right, and then up to the prefrontal cortex. But in trauma, it gets stuck.
Okay.
All the information gets stuck. I won't geek out on you anymore.
No, I love it. I love this.
Short answer. It's more than just being happy. It's actually really a very scientific approach to using the art as healing. And then the way that startup art therapy works is a whole brain healing approach. So we're not doing just a bottom up approach. We're getting also the left right brain integration. But then when you finally are able to get to that prefrontal cortex, where you are able to think with all of those areas, thinking, planning, judgment, decision making, all of that is online again, then you go from the top down. So it's a kind of scientific, and it's way more than I could explain in this short period that we have.
Yes, and it's super interesting. Look how old little things in life that you would think that are not very relevant can help your brain. Um, with something so difficult to treat, which is the trauma.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and then so let's talk about a little bit about trauma. What is really, we all know what trauma is. We don't know what happens with the brain. And since I'm in front of you and you know what happens in the brain with the trauma and how make us get blocked and it doesn't go away. Can you explain to us what happens to our brain when we have trauma?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And you're asking the right person. I am a recognized trauma expert in my field. So what happens with trauma is there's some kind of assault to our system, and our brain perceives it as being dangerous, right? And what happens is that it can set off right brain amygdala. There's a little gland on the right side of our brain, and that is responsible for the fight, flight, or freeze response, which I'm sure you and the listeners have heard of. But what happens is that sometimes an initial trauma, if it's not actually addressed right away, and depends on what kind of trauma it is. And there's a lot of different kinds of trauma. There's acute trauma, which is a one-time incident. There's chronic complex trauma, which is long-term. There's vicarious trauma, where we can actually absorb trauma from other people's stories, which is very common in the therapy profession. And then there's system-induced trauma. If a child has been taken out of their homes and placed in foster care. So there's there's in utero trauma, there's developmental trauma. So there's a lot of different kinds of trauma. So it depends on what you're working with. But sometimes when a trauma has set into that right brain amygdala and the limbic system part of the brain, that's the midbrain, it actually can set that into a trauma loop. And there's something called priming and kindling. So one little tiny PSD incident or something that's a chronic trauma that happens repeatedly will keep that right brain amygdala firing off that fight, flight, or freeze over and over. And it becomes a trauma loop, like a hamster wheel. And priming and kindling in the brain actually is something where that one-time event or the repetition of trauma can actually keep the neurochemicals firing off and building on that initial trauma. And it can actually sensitize throughout a lifetime and become greater than just and reactive, more reactive that one time or repeated chronic trauma.
That is beautiful. And look how our brain works and how can people like you help us humans and other people heal our traumas. And I think art, like my daughter and I are not expertise on art, but we love, like if you saw the rest of my office right now, you'll see all our artwork. We love going to, we do painting. Ever since she was little, I have her first painting right in front of me. And anytime we are stressed or we want to calm or we want to just chill, we take our canvases, which are, I think you can see a little bit of it. No, you can't. Which are on that side of the room. And then we start painting. And it's very calming. There is something to painting that is very, very calming. Is it the colors? Is it the just the concentration you put on it? What is it that makes art so calming?
Well, it definitely, yes, it's so calming. It's all of it. It's the colors, it's the ability to just tune out all of the external stimulation and be able to have a single point of focus and just go inward and reflect and understand what feeling state you're in, because that's something that as a culture we're just human doings, not human beings. So it's really giving you an opportunity to just be with yourself and reflect and connect with yourself. And that's something, that's another way to use art as just pure relaxation. And that's why coloring books for adults got so popular. And something about color, using color. There was a period in our interior decoration era of like all the monochromatic whites and grays, and I'm like, oh my God. And now since the pandemic, it's all shifted. Everybody's like doing this, they call it dopamine decor, because all this color popping everywhere is really eliciting a really good neurochemical state because of that, the way colors respond to color. Yeah.
That is beautiful. I didn't know that. That is wonderful. I love that. So I am curious, like you started these because you were also working through your own trauma and realized that there were some methods that work. And then, as a great entrepreneur said one day, you know what, I'm going to use these to help others. Do you want to tell us about that a little bit?
Sure, Maritza, absolutely. I had a pretty severe history of childhood trauma myself. My mother was a borderline personality disorder and a severe alcoholic, and she ended up in psychiatric units, and I got taken away and had some physical abuse. I had sexual abuse happening, emotional abuse, and neglect. And my father was autistic, or still is. He's still alive. And I didn't really have any parents and any guidance in my life. And as a result, I ended up living on the streets at age 15 and doing drugs. And thank God I was part of the punk rock scene, in the 80s, because it was like a family of misfits of broken, neglected children, all kind of creating a family unit. So I had a lot of abandonment, a lot of anxiety, I started having panic attacks. And so I knew, and I always loved art and the healing that it brought me. And just for the same reasons that we were just talking about, how art is so calming and relaxing. And so told me about art therapy at one point, and I said, "Oh my God, what is that?" And I was like 16. I was like, "I want to do that when I grow up." And so I did. And when I started going through, I became a young mom, by the way, and I put myself through school, college and graduate school. I was on welfare. I was on food stamps. But I knew I needed to do this, and not just for myself, but I was also a healer, and I'd had a lot of mystical, spiritual experiences growing up throughout my childhood. And I knew there was something more than this world, something more than body. And so I knew there was something kind of leading me, guiding me. And I wasn't raised with religion. So I didn't know what this was.
Yes.
So when I started healing myself, when I went into art therapy graduate school, I started noticing a lot of the symptoms that I'd had started going away. And I, at that time, also started working with Native Americans. I don't know how I got connected to tribes, but this is over, many years ago when I was in my 20s, and I was working very closely with them in my late 20s and early 30s, and doing ceremonies, different healing ceremonies, very ancient traditional ceremonies. And this is not using peyote or the Native American church. This is Lakota, Dakota tribes. And so I noticed how I started healing and not just using art therapy, but with also spirituality in Native traditional ways. And I knew I wanted to give back to them. So I devoted my career, when my daughter had reached a point, moved out of the house, and I said, I'm moving to the reservations and I'm going to start a program putting art therapy, trauma treatment trainings into tribal schools. And so now I teach teachers, I teach therapists, and all the mental health professionals in schools, and we put mental health programs into the tribal classroom.
That is beautiful. So while you were with them, you started noticing that the story that they had generational traumas that were given from father to mother to, things like that, from parents to children. Is it well, let's define what is a generational trauma.
Sure. So there's intergenerational trauma, yes, that gets passed down intergenerationally. But with Native Americans and other different cultures too, it's something called historical trauma. Because when there are events or a one-time event in the past, historically, that trauma can actually rewire our brains. And remember, fight, flight, or freeze. And a lot of that trauma is stored in the brain and actually um, it interferes with our genetic structure and the chemical signatures on our DNA. And that gets passed down epigenetically. So it's the epigenetics of historical trauma. So it's not only just, new traumas, but it's old traumas that are stored in the DNA and then can also create newer traumas that are continuing to be passed down. So there's a cycle. The parent becomes, could be depressed and turn to alcohol or, domestic violence. And then those children grow up and have those issues as well. And that cycle keeps going. So the way that I've designed this program to be put into the classroom, not just for Native Americans, but also all cultures, it really addresses intergenerational trauma because it's disrupting that cycle. And if given this curriculum, K through 12, the child has the opportunity to redo the neural chemicals, redo the neural pathways that perpetuates that intergenerational trauma cycle and eventually can reverse historical trauma because you're actually by reworking the neural pathways, you're actually interfering and disrupting that genetic signature that keeps being passed down epigenetically in historical trauma.
And I love the way scientifically you do this. I love it because it is a little more clear than just hearing about it or reading about it. You're like, what is? And then when they tell you, sometimes they tell you that you have to heal your lineage, and it's like, what? What is wrong with with my So, but the way you explain it, it makes so much more sense because it's passed through our DNA. And also the cultural ways that people change. Like if you have an episode in your life, let's put it this way. You have an episode in your life that was traumatic and doesn't happen to everybody. Like as simple as that you got assaulted and robbed. That changed your behavior from there on. And then you pass that through your kids, the new behavior, and then it creates a new culture. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're passing that to the next generation and the next generation. This is the best way to explain it. Thank you, Carey, for that explanation.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes, really interesting thing about epigenetics of trauma is that a grandparent, can experience an original trauma and then their offspring don't experience the same things that the grandparents did, but the grandchild might actually be born and develop a sensitivity towards the original traumatic event and not even know why. And not even understand that grandparent went through that. So there's so many different things that the ways we can carry trauma. And it's important to not only rewire our brains and our genetics, but also there's a quantum aspect to it too, is cutting old timelines and lineages energetically.
Hi, I'm very happy to know you are here watching our podcast today. It is an honor to be featuring so many entrepreneurs on the journeys of their inside voice, their accent that is not an accident. And we want to reach out more people like you who are creating a better world of diversity, inclusiveness, equity, and belonging. So please take a moment to hit the subscribe button below, like and share to others. And even if you want to leave a comment, that'll be nice. Thank you for your support. And now back to the episode. That is beautiful. And it's super interesting because I'm thinking, I'm connecting the two. You are now going to, you ended up in your 20s with the Native Americans, the Lakota and Dakotas. For those of us who are not from here, can you explain to us, can you tell us a little bit in a couple of minutes, who are the Lakotas and Dakotas so that people can kind of like, and even those that are listening to us in other country.
Absolutely. So the way that they are described in the overarching umbrella, they call them the Sioux tribe.
Okay.
So a lot of the Sioux, which actually is a derogatory term, and a lot of people, a lot of Lakota, Dakota, Nakota people, and that's the tribes that fall under that Sioux umbrella. So there's Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people. And under the Lakota people, there are many different bands, they call them bands, that are within that Lakota tribe. And same with Nakota and Dakota. And they even have something called the Ocheti Shakoi, which is the Seven Council Fires. So there's it's a lot to it, but that's the very simplified answer. And Sioux is actually means something like snake in the grass, which is part of a French word that was given to them by the French that is quite derogatory. And so they're trying to change that gradually.
Okay. Okay, so now we go to, and they are located in the Dakotas,
Yes.
Arizona. Okay.
South Dakota, North Dakota, and parts of Nebraska. They were originally a woodlands tribe, but when the white settlers came, they were kind of pushed back from the East Coast and into the plains, like a lot of tribes, and displaced. And some of them, there was Trail of Tears. There's been Trail of Tears, not just with the Cherokee, that's the most famous Trail of Tears, but there have been Trail of Tears with many, many tribes. And unfortunately, there are a lot of federally unrecognized tribes that don't get assistance, that don't have land given to them. They were, a lot of tribes were given land as reservation. In Canada, they call them preserves. And so a lot of those tribes don't have land or government funding for the things that they need. But so that's how the Plains Indians came to the plains.
Yes. So look at this, how that part of diversity, and it's saddened that this was their home and they were displaced from it. And it happened throughout everywhere in the world. And also in South America, our natives were displaced as well. I look whiter, but I have native Indian blood as well, from like the 6 generations back. And from there here, it's been like a lot of mixture. So we are like in what we were talking when we met the first time, talking about races. There are very little tribes as well in South America that stayed within them, because the majority mixed with whites and black, and then created mestizos, sambos. And actually in our country and in South America, the Indians help the African Americans escape. slavery, and it's a beautiful story in a couple of the countries down there. And some of them couldn't. Some of them, unfortunately, in my country, in the Pacific coast. But that's why you see our African, South American being different, because they are mixed with Indian, so we are a little different. But then we also have in the Pacific coast the true South American African communities that are, but we in South America, we're not pure blood. Nobody's pure blood. We're a mix of everything. So a mixed pot. But then one of the things that saddens me is that the story that they carry, how in throughout the whole Americas, how their people were killed when they were helping the newcomers, and how their women were assaulted and mistreated when the women were very important in our tribe, in the tribes. And yeah, that is a huge generational trauma that they're carrying. And someone like you that comes over and said, let me help you find a way to cure this trauma, to help you heal this trauma. It is a magnificent thing to do. Thank you. I feel it from the bottom of my heart, because I am where I come from. We are from the land. That's what we say. At this point, it is very difficult to know what tribe, because that wasn't written, right? So, but then you start working in art therapy programs with tribal communities and classrooms. How was that? And the reason why I'm asking this is because, were you welcomed right away, or were they hesitant of welcoming you?
That's a great question. So I've actually lived in the reservations, and I've been ingratiated, in the communities already before I started doing this program. So for me, I had some inroads, but coming from somebody from the outside wanting to come and work with natives, yes, there's a lot of apprehension and distrust, rightfully so. And a lot of, I've seen so many people come in and I'm going to save the Indians. And that's not helpful for them. They don't want to be a charity case, right? Because they have their own healing traditions, and that, we have to respect that. But a lot of people who come in and say, oh my gosh, I'm going to do all X, Y, and Z. And then they get really discouraged because they see that intergenerational trauma and the historical trauma and the impacts that it's had on their culture. Because if you look at it historically, in the German Holocaust or slavery, there's been people that have come in and rescued those causes. In the German, we had in the Holocaust, there was a world war, that people said, no, we're not going to take this anymore. We're not letting you do this. And slavery, there's the Civil War where we're not going to let you do this. But for Native Americans, nobody's ever come in and helped them.
Yes.
And so you see these small little victories, like, Standing Rock, where all these like electronica hippie hula hoopers came in and were like, oh, we're going to get on TV and make this, XL pipeline, but that it wasn't until things like that started happening that people started recognizing that we've got trouble right here in our backyard. And I can't tell you, as a woman-owned small business trying to help Native Americans back in 2013, 14, 10 years, 11 years ago, it was really hard to get funding as a small nonprofit. Nobody wanted to help the Native cause. So it's really, really great that, people are starting to see the importance. They're starting to recognize Native, because this is a recent trauma. This is only like 150 years old.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and there's still broken treaties, and there's still things that the natives deal with on a day-to-day basis. We had a lot of hate crimes and police shootings and things like that, and the natives deal with that on a day-to-day basis, but it doesn't become like a big national event. So that's where my heart is let's rebuild the First Nations people, fortify them. So, the Iroquois prophecy says that the native people were going to be the one to save man. Right. So, but they're not in any position to do that right now. I mean, some tribes are more strong. I mean, there's really strong tribes out there that are doing amazing things. And there's individuals that are doing amazing things in the tribes that I work with primarily. And I work with tribes all over the country doing this program, but I've just lived and had my home base there. I live part-time with them. So there's really good things that are being done. And my whole heart mission is to be putting these prevention and early intervention programs into tribal schools across America.
And I call out the audience to realize that it is our heritage. They are the true people that come from the land, and they need help. So if you need help, if you want to help them, and if you are a tribe that needs help, contact Carey. We will give the contact information in a little bit, and we'll put it all in the notes. It is a beautiful cause what you're doing, and it amazes me more and more how we are dreaming those that started our human race, right? And because this is not only here, it's everywhere in the world.
Absolutely. And, with your countries down in South America, Central America, and the Spanish conquistadors that came, and, there's very similar traumas there. And even today, there's a lot of very, intact tribes being displaced, due to deforestation, oil drilling, and, Pachamama Alliance, working with the Ecuadorian tribes. And so there's so many things that we could all be doing for Native people, I feel. And, I found out I have Native in my Native blood in my mom's side, from an Ohio tribe. And so it really makes me go, oh, that's why there's something that my ancestors are leading me to this work.
Yeah.
So, but to heal ourselves is really important.
It's so helpful and so beautiful. So, like people like you that have done the research and found out that you have Native blood, I can tell you right now, because I come from Colombia. Today, there is no one person that has pure nothing. We are a mix of everything, and more than one of us it has. Well, first of all, we are all from Africa. That's where we all came from. And we were talking about this, how it looks like the schools are not teaching that evolution of the human being as much and as deep as we probably got it when we were going to school. You have no idea how many people my age I've talked to, or a little younger, I talk to, and they're like, what? We come from Africa? And I'm like, yeah, prehistoric history.
Yeah, imagine if the KKK knew that.
It's like we are all Africans. We just spread out. We spread out. So it is beautiful how we all came to the one world, but also don't forget where we come from. And this is the idea of this podcast is to own who we are and value it and honor it and love one another. Because no matter the differences, at the end, we are all humans. We are all the same. Carey,
Beautiful.
one last question. And this one is more of not only how the therapy helps and how you're helping the natives, but you're also mentioning about all cultures. So let's talk about all cultures help.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. We are branching out, not just Native American tribal schools and behavioral health, but we are working with juvenile justice, juvenile detention centers. We have a pilot program going on in a couple of those state penitentiaries. So, because adults also need a lot of healing because they don't have that whole brain functioning in that prefrontal cortex online, and they've done research studies. So we're putting programs in there, and we're going to be working with education departments around the country. And what I'd love to do is get this translated, my curriculum, into Spanish, but all languages. Yeah, but we can't do it with Google Translate because it doesn't translate all that well, right?
No, don't do it with Google Translate. You can use Google Translate, and then I can help you with the correction.
That would be wonderful, Maritza. Yeah. So, and I'd love to, get this into schools all over, and then in war-torn zones, for the children affected by war. And first responders doing this, because natural disasters, we can actually prevent that one-time natural disaster becoming a long-term trauma for children. Yes. And into adulthood. But also, I'm going to be launching a new program working for teens that actually is rewiring your brain from trauma and healing yourself. So you don't have to be in school, or, it's going to be a whole other curriculum, a whole other online program that people will have access to. And I'll give you that information when it comes out.
That is wonderful. And I need to hear more about this program. And now since we're getting to the end of this wonderful interview, and I'm already imagining that next time we will go and do an interview, the tribes that you work with, and probably hands-on with the therapy so that people can see how beautiful this is. But before we say goodbye, I would like you to tell our audience how they can find you and where they can find you.
Sure. Okay. My name is Carey MacCarthy, so go to startuparttherapy.com. You can email me at carey@startuparttherapy.com. That's CAREY at startuparttherapy.com. And if you're in a training, our business line is 415-947-9608.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Carey. And would you like to leave the audience with a last thought?
Well, yes. Thank you, Maritza, so much for having me here. And I firmly believe that when we're healing all of ourselves first, and then we can go out and bring healing to others, it heals the planet. So our brand slogan is heal the people, heal the planet. So thank you.
I love your slogan. Thank you so much, Carey, for being here with us today. And to you, our audience, remember you are here in this planet because the greatest source brought you with love to be loved and love one another. Thank you and see you next time. Bye. Hi, it's Maritza here. If you like this episode of My Accent is No Accident podcast and would like to listen more like this, subscribe wherever you're listening to it or watching it. Leave us a nice review and share with your friends, family, and network. Thanks for listening.